Thunder from Nineveh, the rise and fall of the Assyrian Empire. The screams of dying soldiers echoed through Nineveh's burning streets as 3 centuries of imperial might crumbled in a single summer night. The year was 612 BCE, and the greatest military machine ever built was drawing its last breath. But before Nineveh fell, before its libraries were torched and its gold-plated temples collapsed, the Assyrians had created something unprecedented, the world's first true empire, stretching from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. This is not just a tale of conquest, it's the story of how a small kingdom of traders and farmers transformed itself into history's first superpower through technological innovation, psychological warfare, and administrative genius. What follows is the epic rise and catastrophic fall of an empire that revolutionized warfare, pioneered mass deportation as state policy, and left behind libraries of clay tablets that continue to astonish us today. From Ashurnasirpal II's fearsome war machines to Ashurbanipal's magnificent library, from Sennacherib's engineering marvels to Esarhaddon's audacious Egyptian campaigns. This is the story of how the Assyrians shaped our world and why their fall still echoes through the centuries. The rise of Adad-nirari II, architect of empire. Adad-nirari II stood at the gates of Assur in 911 BCE, gazing across the sun-baked plains of northern Mesopotamia. The kingdom he inherited was little more than a modest trading state, hemmed in by hostile powers and struggling to maintain control over its immediate neighbors. But in his mind's eye, he saw something greater, an empire that would stretch beyond the horizon. Within months, he would transform this vision into reality through a military campaign that would rewrite the rules of warfare. The first thing he changed was the army itself. Gone were the seasonal farmers who fought only during harvest downtime. In their place, Adad-nirari built something unprecedented, a standing professional force that could fight year-round. His soldiers trained relentlessly with new iron weapons, far superior to the bronze still used by their enemies. He created specialized units, shield-bearers who could form impenetrable walls, archers who could darken the sky with arrows, and cavalry who could pursue fleeing enemies for days. When he struck west in 909 BCE, his neighbors were unprepared for this new kind of warfare. Traditional armies would campaign briefly, take some plunder, and return home. Adad-nirari's forces, by contrast, kept coming. City after city fell as he pushed toward the Euphrates. Local rulers who had long played Assyria against its rivals suddenly found themselves facing an entirely different kind of threat. Those who surrendered were allowed to keep their thrones as vassals. Those who resisted faced a fate that would soon become legendary. Their cities were razed, their populations deported, and their lands incorporated directly into what was becoming an empire. The masterstroke came in 894 BCE, when Adad-nirari introduced another innovation that would become a hallmark of Assyrian power: the royal road system. These carefully maintained highways allowed his army to move with unprecedented speed, letting him strike at multiple enemies in a single campaign season. He built fortified supply depots along these routes, creating a logistical network that could support armies far larger than anything seen before. When he died in 891 BCE, he left behind not just a larger kingdom, but a revolutionary template for imperial power that his successors would build upon to create the most formidable empire the world had yet seen. The old king had awakened a lion, and its roar would echo across the ancient world for 3 centuries to come. His innovations, the professional army, the iron weapons, the royal roads, the supply depots, would become the foundation of all future empires, from Persia to Rome. But even he could not have imagined how far his successors would take his vision, or the heights and depths that would follow. The rise of Ashurnasirpal II's professional war machine. Ashurnasirpal II's first order upon taking the throne in 883 BCE was to construct something his enemies had never seen: a dedicated engineering corps. While other kings relied on brute force to take cities, his sappers and siege specialists developed iron-tipped battering rams mounted on wheeled armored platforms. Behind these machines, protected from enemy arrows, his troops could systematically breach the strongest walls in the Near East. It was the ancient equivalent of the tank, and it changed everything. The first test came at the walls of Tushan, where defenders watched in horror as these monstrous engines rolled forward, immune to their arrows and stones. Within hours, the supposedly impregnable walls cracked. But it was what happened next that truly revolutionized warfare. Rather than simply plundering the city, Ashurnasirpal transformed it into an Assyrian military colony. He installed a permanent garrison, rebuilt the fortifications to his own specifications, and converted it into a forward operating base for future campaigns. This pattern, conquer, fortify, advance, would become the blueprint for empire building for millennia to come. By 879 BCE, he had added another innovation: psychological warfare. His scribes carved vivid reliefs depicting the fate of rebels: flaying, impalement, mass executions. These weren't just art, they were propaganda, distributed throughout the empire as a warning. The message was clear: resist and face annihilation, submit and enjoy the benefits of Pax Assyriaca. Cities began surrendering at the mere sight of his army on the horizon. In one famous campaign to the Mediterranean, 9 kingdoms submitted without a fight, sending tribute of silver, gold, and precious timber simply to avoid facing his war machine. But perhaps his most lasting innovation came in 878 BCE, when he established the first formal military academy at Kalhu. Here, officers studied the campaigns of previous kings, learned siege tactics, and mastered the art of combined arms warfare, coordinating infantry, cavalry, and siege engines in complex operations. The graduates of this academy would lead Assyrian armies to victories that would have been impossible for the seasonal militias of the past. When he died in 859 BCE, Ashurnasirpal had done more than expand the empire. He had created the world's first truly professional military force. Every aspect was specialized, from the siege engineers to the cavalry scouts, from the frontline infantry to the logistics officers who kept them supplied. It was a system so effective that when archaeologists uncovered its details 2,000 years later, they were stunned by its sophistication. The age of amateur armies was over. The era of professional warfare had begun. And the next generation of Assyrian kings would use this weapon to reshape the known world. Empire of Iron and Fear. The rise of Assyrian supremacy. In 853 BCE, Shalmaneser III gazed across the battlefield at Karkar, where he faced something unprecedented: a coalition of 12 kings who had united specifically to stop Assyrian expansion. Led by the ambitious King Hadadezer of Damascus, they had assembled the largest army the ancient Near East had ever seen: over 60,000 infantry, 2,000 chariots, and for the first time in military history, a regiment of camel-mounted warriors from the Arab deserts. The anti-Assyrian alliance represented a desperate gamble by the kingdoms of Syria-Palestine to halt the empire's relentless advance. What followed was the largest battle of the 9th century BCE. Shalmaneser's scribes describe how the plain turned red with blood as his ironclad troops smashed into the coalition's lines. The fighting raged for days. When his enemies deployed their camel corps, hoping the smell would spook the Assyrian horses, Shalmaneser countered by dismounting his cavalry to fight on foot. The battle ended in a bloody stalemate, but it marked a turning point. Never again would so many kingdoms dare to unite against Assyrian power. Shalmaneser's response to this resistance was to elevate brutality into an art form. His annual campaigns became ceremonies of terror, each more elaborate than the last. Cities that surrendered were spared, but forced to watch the fate of those who resisted. The walls of his palace at Nimrud were covered with scenes that still shock archaeologists today. Rivers choked with corpses, pyramids of severed heads, mass executions conducted with mechanical efficiency. But behind this theater of cruelty lay cold calculation. Terror was a tool, carefully calibrated to maximize compliance while minimizing the need for costly sieges. His 40-year reign transformed the political landscape of the ancient Near East. By its end, no single power could challenge Assyrian supremacy. His successors would fight rebels and put down revolts, but never again would they face a unified opposition like the coalition at Karkar. More significantly, he had demonstrated that empire building was not just about conquest. It was about creating systems of control that could last for generations. The fear he instilled would outlive him by centuries, and the administrative systems he perfected would be studied and copied by future empires from Persia to Rome. When he died in 824 BCE, Shalmaneser had set the stage for the next phase of Assyrian power. The empire was no longer just a military superpower. It was becoming a sophisticated political machine that could absorb and control vast territories through a combination of terror, trade, and bureaucratic efficiency. The next generation of kings would build on this foundation to create something even more remarkable, a true world empire. The rise of Tiglath-pileser III, revolutionizing empire governance. In 745 BCE, a general named Pul seized the Assyrian throne in a lightning coup and crowned himself Tiglath-pileser III. The empire had grown too vast for traditional methods of control, and this military commander turned bureaucrat was about to revolutionize how empires functioned. His first act was to split the realm into small provinces, each managed by a governor who answered directly to him. It was the birth of centralized administration, a system so effective that its basic principles still underpin modern governments. But his true genius emerged in his solution to the eternal problem of rebellious populations. Previous kings had simply massacred troublemakers. Tiglath-pileser instead developed a sophisticated deportation program. Entire populations were uprooted and dispersed across the empire, while loyal subjects were moved in to replace them. Craftsmen from Babylon found themselves in Damascus, while Syrian merchants were relocated to Media. By 732 BCE, his records show over 400,000 people had been moved across the empire. These displaced populations, dependent on imperial authority for protection in their new homes, became some of Assyria's most loyal subjects. The empire's economy boomed under this new system. Deported craftsmen shared techniques across regions, creating new fusion styles in art and architecture. Trade flourished as merchants, now scattered across the empire, created new commercial networks. Even agriculture was transformed. Farmers brought their techniques and crops to new regions, leading to agricultural innovations that increased food production across the empire. In one brilliant stroke, Tiglath-pileser had turned a punishment into an engine of economic growth. By 727 BCE, when death finally claimed him, Tiglath-pileser had created something unprecedented, an empire that could largely run itself. His administrative system was so effective that even weak kings could maintain control. He had transformed Assyria from a mere military superpower into a sophisticated political and economic machine. The stage was set for the empire's golden age, though none could predict the price that such unprecedented power would exact from its wielders. The next generation of Assyrian kings would push the boundaries of imperial control even further, testing the limits of how much territory one state could govern, and in doing so, they would discover both the heights of imperial power and the seeds of its own destruction. The rise and fall of Sargon II, a monument to ambition and hubris. In 722 BCE, as the dust settled from another palace coup, the usurper Sargon II found himself ruling an empire larger than any in history, but his grip on power was precarious. To cement his questionable legitimacy, he launched the most ambitious construction project the world had ever seen, a new capital city called Dur-Sharrukin, Fortress of Sargon. Rising from empty plains north of Nineveh, this massive complex would become a monument to Assyrian power, with walls so thick that 3 chariots could ride abreast along their top. The palace at its heart was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Visitors entered through gates flanked by colossal human-headed bulls with eagle's wings, their 5 legs creating an illusion of movement from any angle. As foreign dignitaries walked the corridors, they passed mile after mile of carved reliefs showing the fate of rebels. Scenes of siege warfare, torture, and mass deportation rendered in exquisite detail by master craftsmen. By the time they reached Sargon's throne room, most ambassadors were ready to agree to any terms. But beneath this spectacular facade, a crisis was brewing. Babylon, the ancient city of learning and power to the south, had become a festering wound in the empire's side. Its people viewed themselves as the inheritors of ancient Mesopotamian civilization and refused to accept Assyrian dominance. In 710 BCE, Sargon gambled everything on a bold solution. He took the unprecedented step of personally assuming the title King of Babylon, entering the city not as a conqueror, but as a legitimate Babylonian monarch. For a brief moment, it seemed he had solved the empire's greatest political challenge. Then came the disaster that shocked the ancient world. In 705 BCE, Sargon was killed in battle in distant Anatolia. His body never recovered, denied proper burial rites. The Assyrians viewed this as a terrible omen, a sign of divine displeasure. His son, Sennacherib, horrified by this ill fortune, abandoned Dur-Sharrukin before it was even fully occupied. The magnificent city, product of countless resources and thousands of lives, was left to crumble in the desert. It stands today as a monument to imperial hubris and a warning about the price of unbridled ambition. Yet even this shock would pale compared to the turbulent events that were about to unfold under Sennacherib's reign as the empire entered its most dramatic phase. The rise and fall of Sennacherib's empire. Jerusalem's walls loomed before Sennacherib's army in 701 BCE, the last holdout in his campaign to crush a massive rebellion. Inside, King Hezekiah and his people watched in horror as the Assyrians unleashed their newest weapon, a hydraulic siege engine that could shoot massive stone projectiles with devastating force. The city that had withstood countless armies now faced the most sophisticated military machine in history. But something extraordinary happened. Jerusalem didn't fall. Whether from disease in his army, as Assyrian records subtly hint, or divine intervention, as Hebrew scribes claimed Sennacherib withdrew, it was a moment that would echo through history, immortalized in biblical accounts and Lord Byron's poetry. Stung by this rare setback, Sennacherib turned his genius to transforming his capital, Nineveh, into the greatest city on earth. His engineers created a hydraulic system that would have impressed modern architects, a network of canals, aqueducts, and dams that brought water from mountains 50 kilometers away to feed his famous hanging gardens. They invented the Archimedes screw centuries before Archimedes, using it to lift water to terraced gardens that seemed to float in the air. The city grew to house 120,000 people, making it the largest urban center in the world, with paved streets, botanical gardens, and a library that would one day shock archaeologists with its advanced mathematical and astronomical knowledge. But while Sennacherib built his paradise, political storm clouds gathered. The king had made a fateful decision early in his reign. Unlike his father, he refused to honor Babylon's special status. When the ancient city revolted, he showed no mercy. In 689 BCE, he did the unthinkable. He destroyed Babylon completely, diverting the Euphrates River to wash away even its ruins. It was an act of sacrilege that shocked the ancient world and even horrified many Assyrians. The gods, it seemed, shared their horror. In 681 BCE, as Sennacherib prayed in a temple, his own sons assassinated him in a crime so shocking that tablets recording it tremble with outrage. The king who had built an earthly paradise died on the steps of a shrine, his blood staining the sanctuary floor. The empire had reached its zenith of power, but the seeds of its destruction were already sprouting in the blood-soaked soil of Babylon. Pax Assyriaca, the rise and challenges of a universal empire. When Esarhaddon emerged victorious from the bloody succession crisis of 681 BCE, his first act was unprecedented. He ordered Babylon rebuilt. The son of a Babylonian mother, he understood what his father never had, that might alone couldn't hold an empire together. Under his reign, Assyria would attempt something revolutionary, cultural fusion on a massive scale. Babylonian priests were restored to their temples, ancient texts were copied and preserved, and the city rose again from its ruins, grander than ever. But Esarhaddon's true masterpiece was the conquest of Egypt in 671 BCE. Leading his army across 500 miles of desert, a logistical feat that wouldn't be matched until Alexander the Great, he took Memphis in just 15 days. The pharaohs who had ruled the Nile Valley for 3 millennia became Assyrian vassals. For the first time in history, the two great cradles of civilization, Mesopotamia and Egypt, were united under a single ruler. The dream of universal empire, once merely ambitious, had become reality. Inside this vast realm, an extraordinary cultural renaissance bloomed. Assyrian artists incorporated Egyptian motifs into their work, while Egyptian craftsmen adopted Assyrian styles. Phoenician merchants carried new ideas along with their goods, creating the first truly international culture. The Aramaic language spread across the empire, becoming the lingua franca of the ancient world, a position it would hold for 1,000 years. Scholars from different traditions met in imperial libraries, sharing and preserving knowledge that would otherwise have been lost to history. Yet even at this moment of triumph, Esarhaddon was haunted by omens and prophecies. The stars, according to his astrologers, foretold trouble over the succession. Determined to prevent another civil war, he implemented an elaborate plan. His eldest son, Ashurbanipal, would rule Assyria, while another son, Shamash-shum-ukin, would govern Babylon. He made every noble in the empire swear loyalty oaths to this arrangement, recorded in detailed treaties written on clay tablets. But as he lay dying on another campaign to Egypt in 669 BCE, he must have wondered if even these precautions would be enough. The empire had reached its greatest territorial extent, but holding it together would prove even harder than building it. The next generation would face the ultimate test. Could any human institution maintain control over such vast territories and diverse peoples? The answer would shake the foundations of the ancient world. The last great king, Ashurbanipal, and the fall of Assyria. Ashurbanipal was different from his predecessors. While they had gloried in records of military conquest, he boasted of something unprecedented. He could read and write. In 668 BCE, the new king created his masterpiece, a library that would preserve the entire wisdom of ancient Mesopotamia. Tens of thousands of clay tablets were gathered from across the empire, carefully copied and catalogued in a system so sophisticated that modern librarians recognize its basic principles. From astronomical observations to medical texts, from epic poetry to grammatical treatises, the collection represented the first systematic attempt to gather all human knowledge in one place. Yet beneath this cultural flowering, the machinery of empire was showing dangerous signs of strain. The cost of maintaining armies on multiple frontiers was draining the treasury. The constant need for soldiers had begun depopulating farming regions. The very success of Assyrian deportation policies had created a multicultural society that was increasingly difficult to control. In the outer provinces, local governors were beginning to act more like independent kings than imperial servants. The crisis exploded in 652 BCE when Ashurbanipal's own brother, Shamash-shum-ukin of Babylon, orchestrated a massive rebellion. The betrayal struck at the heart of imperial ideology. If the king's own brother could rebel, who could be trusted? Though Ashurbanipal eventually crushed the revolt, burning his brother alive in his palace, the cost was catastrophic. The empire's resources were exhausted just as new threats were emerging on the horizons. Median tribes in the mountains of Iran, Scythian horsemen from the steppes, and a resurgent Babylon under the Chaldeans. When Ashurbanipal died in 631 BCE, he left behind an empire that appeared more powerful than ever. His library preserved knowledge that would otherwise have been lost forever. His palace reliefs depicted luxurious gardens where the king hunted lions for sport. Yet he was the last Assyrian king whose name would be remembered with any glory. Within 2 decades, the greatest empire the world had yet seen would vanish so completely that Greek historians would write about it as a legend. The fall, when it came, would be swifter and more complete than anyone could have imagined. The swift collapse of the Assyrian Empire. The years following Ashurbanipal's death in 631 BCE read like a fever dream of apocalyptic proportions. Within a decade, 2 of his sons had murdered each other in a civil war that shattered the empire's carefully maintained political system. Provincial governors declared independence, while frontier armies, unpaid and abandoned, simply melted away. The mighty war machine that had terrorized the known world for 3 centuries was eating itself alive. In 626 BCE, a Chaldean chieftain named Nabopolassar seized control of Babylon. Unlike previous rebels, he understood Assyrian tactics. He'd served as one of their generals. Rather than face their armies in open battle, he launched a guerrilla campaign, attacking supply lines and isolated garrisons. More dangerous still, he forged an alliance with Cyaxares, leader of the Medes, who had mastered the art of cavalry warfare in ways that made Assyrian chariot tactics obsolete. The barbarians that Assyria had held at bay for centuries now possessed something new: sophisticated leadership and unified purpose. The end came with shocking speed. In 614 BCE, Medes and Chaldeans besieged Assur, the ancient religious capital. The city fell before an Assyrian relief army could arrive. 2 years later, in 612 BCE, they surrounded Nineveh itself. The last great Assyrian king, Sin-shar-ishkun, watched in despair as enemy engineers diverted the river Kosur into the city's foundations. The walls, softened by the water, began to crumble. According to Babylonian chronicles, the siege lasted just 3 months. When the end came, Sin-shar-ishkun set his palace ablaze and perished in the flames, along with his entire court. A small remnant of the Assyrian army, led by a prince named Ashur-uballit II, retreated to Haran, where they made a desperate last stand with Egyptian allies. But by 609 BCE, this too was over. The greatest empire the world had yet seen had vanished so completely that within 2 generations its cities were abandoned and forgotten. Xenophon, leading his 10,000 Greeks past the ruins of Nineveh in 401 BCE, had no idea what the massive mounds of ruins had once been. The empire that had invented imperial administration, professional armies, and systematic deportation as tools of control had become a cautionary tale about the ephemeral nature of power, a lesson that would be pondered by emperors and kings for millennia to come. Guardians of humanity's oldest stories, the legacy of the Assyrians. For 2,000 years, Nineveh lay buried beneath desert sands, its magnificent palaces known only through legends and biblical accounts. Then, in 1842, a young French diplomat named Paul-Émile Botta began digging into a mysterious mound near Mosul. What he found stunned the world: massive winged bulls, intricate relief carvings, and endless rooms filled with clay tablets. The lost empire had suddenly become real again. When British archaeologist Austen Henry Layard later uncovered Ashurbanipal's library, he discovered something even more remarkable. The Assyrians had preserved texts from the dawn of civilization, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, which had been lost to human memory for millennia. But the greatest discovery about the Assyrians wasn't their monuments or their texts. It was the realization that they had invented the basic tools of empire that would be used by every great power that followed. The Persian Empire adopted their provincial system and royal roads. The Romans copied their military tactics and propaganda techniques. Even their downfall offered crucial lessons: that no military force, however powerful, can withstand a united opposition forever, that empires built on fear alone contain the seeds of their own destruction, and that the mightiest of human creations can vanish so completely that future generations might walk unknowingly over their ruins. Yet through their careful preservation of ancient knowledge, the Assyrians achieved a kind of immortality they never expected. Not as eternal rulers of the world, but as the guardians of humanity's oldest stories, passing them down to us across an abyss of time, written in clay that outlasted their empire.